What is good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the second ever episode of the Slapping Meat Football Podcast. It'll be the final one of 2024 as we're starting to get this thing, up and rolling. Just finished the Slapping Meat Wrestling Podcast for the year this week as well. We're headed into the Christmas break, New Year. And so 2025 will be the first full year of the Slapping Meat Football Podcast. Welcome to all who are listening. Today we're going to discuss a little bit more of the college football playoff, right? We saw the first round this weekend, and I want to discuss that. And some of the conversation going around that, right? I'm not the biggest, in terms of talking about sports, because I'm a super casual sports fan, right? So I have opinions on certain things, but the reason this is called the Slapping Meat Football Podcast and not the Slapping Meat Sports Podcast is because I don't really care about a lot of sports outside of football in terms of the ins and outs, and even within football, so the off season with football is going to be a little bit difficult for me to cover, and so I just want to sort of preface that as we head into the new year, that a lot of the conversation that we have may not necessarily be X's and O's related. I'm not a good person to have on to break down players, right? As we get closer to the draft, I'll do my mock drafts and stuff like that, and talk about things but I'm not an X's and O's analyst type person. I'm not and that's probably a big key. I'm not a big fan of analytics when it comes to sports, right? I think that analytics have kind of ruined sports, right? From a, let's look at the X's and O's, let's look at all the data, let's put it in the computer, and that predicts things. I think that takes away from a lot of what I enjoy about sports, which is sort of just getting on the field and playing the game. And that's the theme that I want to talk about when we talk about the college football playoff. You just got to play the games, right? But before we get there, one other big news since the last time I did an episode, and that is Bill Belichick is the first or is the new head coach in his first college job as a head coach. He is the head coach of the North Carolina Tar Heels. I wish he would have chosen a different team because I am a Clemson fan. Right, and so North Carolina being an ACC team makes it really difficult to cheer for Bill Belichick and the Tar Heels. Here's the thing: as long as they're not playing Clemson, I'm cheering for the Tar Heels. Right? I think the fun thing with college football is, I was always sort of looking for that other team that I could cheer for, like Clemson being my main team, but that other team to sort of get behind. And I couldn't really get behind any other team. I like Boston College, but Boston College is more of a rival with Clemson than North Carolina is. And it's always what is that other team? One, I have that other team now, and it's a local team to me. Go Tar Heels, as long as you're not playing my Clemson Tigers, right? And so, I expect a lot of good things out of that team. Maybe not next year, though they do have a really favorable schedule. But in the years upcoming, I expect some sort of turnaround with that UNC program. Bill Belichick's no nonsense. I'm interested to see how he plays in with that the transfer portal system. Not having to sign players, but walking around and maybe recruiting players. I think there's going to be a lot of people in college football who are interested in playing for Coach Belichick because of who he is, right? And I think there's going to be some who are drawn into the challenge of playing for Coach Belichick. That I think that's going to create. I think it's going to create a challenge for some people. He's very different than any other college coach, I think, out there. I think it's part of the reason that people wanted to go play for Alabama is because Coach Saban was much tougher of a coach. And if Bill Belichick can start to produce a UNC to NFL pipeline, UNC is going to be a target for players to want to come and play in, right? It's in a really good area for just to live in, like North Carolina, being a citizen of the state. Taxes compared to other parts of the country, like a New York, like a California, it's not a Texas where there's no, there's still a state tax here. But for like students, living is decent here. You can get it's North Carolina, so you're going to get a really, really good education while you're there. That if that's something you care about. But it's also like an area in the ACC. There's talks of like North Carolina leaving the ACC potentially. So that conference identity, I think that's something that, if you're, in 2 years you're negotiating with North Carolina to join the SEC or something, right? That's an interesting part that I don't know if a lot of people have thought of. But I think just from a coaching standpoint, I think he's the best coach in the SEC, or excuse me, in the ACC right now. Like just stepping into, right, and he's, I don't know how he's going to set up the staff and what all that looks like, but I think you would have to think within the next 2 to 3 years that equals success for that program. But let's turn it to the college football playoff, because that's all the talk right now in the sports world. Like, we got bamboozled again. This system sucks. Why do we expand? There's no, SEC fans are complaining because, Alabama and South Carolina and Ole Miss didn't get in, and Clemson and SMU and Indiana got handed to them, but so did Tennessee. And they're taking the wrong message out of this weekend. The message we should be taking is that home field advantage really means something in college football, right? Home field advantage really means something. All the home teams won this week. And so you should be playing for the first 4 seeds, right? But if you're not a conference champion, you should want to play to be a home field team. You should want to play for that 5 seed. You should, right? Now, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, this system works perfectly. There's obviously things that need to be changed, but there was always going to be that way. My issue that I have with the narrative coming out of this weekend is that these teams didn't deserve to be here. Well, that's not, maybe outside of Clemson, but Clemson followed the system. The system was, if you're a conference champion, the top 5 conference champions get locked into the playoffs. I don't see an issue with that. Also, Clemson, was in it till about the last 6 minutes of the game. They started bad. They started to come back, and then, some bad play calling. As a Clemson fan, I got some things I want to talk about with that game. Namely, the play calling. I think in the lack of run defense that Clemson has, right? But that's, for a different conversation. I want to try to remain generalized to just the whole playoff. But this is a system that works. I think what it needs, though, is some adjustment. And that's what this first year is all about, is figuring out where we need to fit this adjustment at. What adjustments need to be done. I think this ultimately will lead to an expansion to a 16-team playoff. But the biggest issue I think that we need to come down to is, are we looking for the 12 best teams in college football or the 12 best resumes? I think we need to get some clear answers from the committee. I think a lot of people who are complaining about the system make some valid points. There shouldn't be an active member in college football as an AD on this committee, right? No matter what school you're at, right? There shouldn't be an active member whether it's an AD of a conference or like a board member of some sort of. All of these should be like third party, nothing to do with any conference or team members on this committee. We also, I think, need some sort of standard criteria, right? And what I mean by standard, like this is what we measure against, right? Do wins matter? Like we need to have written criteria on what it takes to make the college football playoff. Because having it change every single year is a problem. We need a standardized set of criteria to get into the playoffs. I also think that the losers of round one should be into a bowl game, right? I think like Clemson lost, so their season's over with. But I think that they should be injected into the bowl season, right? In some way, shape, or form. I think you could set 4 bowl games apart, or even it could just be 2 bowl games, where sort of like a consolation type bowl games, where like Clemson plays Indiana and SMU plays Tennessee or something like that, right? And have the loser, because all 4 teams that lost had 10 wins, and they're not going to participate in a, like when you look at the Clemson season, you see ACC champion and then no bowl game, right? And I'm not a big fan. I think we need to, right? Some of these teams, like a 6-6 Florida, shouldn't be in a bowl game. That's just my opinion on that. But when it comes to like the college football playoff, right, I don't understand why we're complaining on the first year of this 12-team expansion. I don't quite understand why we would complain about that. I'm just being completely honest with you. Like I don't actually understand why we're complaining. I think we need to give it some time, just like we needed some time with the 4-team playoff. Right, we needed a few years to figure out how things worked and what some simple solutions are just there's 2. I'm always going to go back to this answer: 32 teams. But then someone brought something to my attention that I read on X that makes a lot of sense. Division 3, Division 2, and then the FCS in Division 1. So if y'all don't know, Division 1 is FBS, which is sort of the college football playoff, and then FCS, which is like North Dakota State, South Dakota, Montana State, Idaho, teams like that, right? So FCS, Division 2, and Division 3 college football all use a 24-team model. They all use the same model. It works. No one ever complains about it at all. And so I'm sitting here thinking, like, you have a system that already worked. Why, when we said a college football playoff, why did we not try to use this method immediately? Like, we knew this worked. You've been doing this for years, well before, even while Division I FBS was using the BCS model. Right, they were still doing a playoff model, right? And so I'm not quite certain why they tried a 4-team to start with. I think that always was going to lead to more teams, an expanded playoff. I still think 32 would be the perfect system. And I say that because it provides opportunity for all the conferences to be represented, but you also get all the good teams. And I know there's like this debate that there's only like 6 good teams in college football, and that college football is different than college basketball, in that the good teams, and the good teams typically win when they play. But this comes down to, you still got to play the games, right? So Indiana's resume made them, like, they deserve the spot in the college football playoff. They still got to go and play Notre Dame in Notre Dame. So home field advantage, I think, is a part of it. You got to play the games, right? Clemson was obviously less prepared than Texas was at the start of the game. SMU was not prepared to play Penn State. Have you ever played in Penn State? Have you ever, most people don't go into Penn State and have an easy ride through a Penn State game, right? Like, that's a really tough place to play in the cold. Home field advantage matters. You got to play the games. And so I don't understand this whole argument of, well, we just need to, forget the committee, just go by the analytics, look at who the 12 best teams are, and put them in the playoffs, right? And the only people really proposing this that I'm seeing are SEC fans, right? Because what this comes down to is the SEC for the last 10, 15 years has been sort of catered to in terms of believing that they're the best teams, that's the best conference in college football. And it's been a complete lie forever. Do they have team? Do they have national championship? Sure. But what they're leaning on is Georgia and Alabama. And more exclusively, longer than the past 5 years, for the last 10 years, Alabama by themselves. They're really leaning on the brand of Alabama. And what's happened is that these people believe that brands should matter more than resume. I still think wins should matter. I still think that a win against, a Clemson win against SMU in the ACC championship means more than some random win against Auburn that Alabama may have, right? My other thing is that now everyone that's an SEC fan, Bama, South Carolina, Ole Miss, the butthurt fans because their team didn't get in, they're sitting here complaining about cupcake schedules as if Alabama didn't have Western Kentucky and Mercer on their schedule this year, right? So the issue that I have is, first off, save me the outrage, because Alabama's been known to have really, really easy schedules at times, but also the SEC historically doesn't schedule right. I think there was a point in Texas A&M's history of being in the SEC, which is at least a decade now, right? They've only played Georgia twice. They've only played Georgia twice in 10 years, right? That's crazy scheduling. Please don't blame every other team, right? Don't blame Indiana, because Indiana didn't get to choose which Big Ten teams they faced this year. But at least Indiana historically plays a lot more of the teams in the Big Ten than someone like Alabama, who sort of play the same 4 or 5. And then they get South Carolina sprinkled in it once every 4 years or whatever, right? I don't know. I mean, I think they just changed their system, but also you guys schedule 4 out of conference games. You play 8 conference games, which is fine. I think if I was in control of the schedule, I would have 8 conference games, and I would have every conference set up the same way. 8 conference games, and then you would play the equal team in the other. So take the Power 5, so that's the ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and the Pac-12 when the Pac-12 comes back, right? Take the overall rankings of the previous season, and you've played the other 4 in that ranking, right? So if you finish first in the ACC, Clemson won the ACC, right? That means they would play Georgia. That means they would play Arizona State. That means they would play Oregon, because Oregon, right? That's a tough-ass schedule, right? But then, SMU finished second, so they would play Texas and Ohio State, or Penn State, because Penn State was in the conference championship game, wasn't it? Right, so they would play Penn State and Texas, and you get the point what I'm saying, right? I think that's how I would like to see the schedule, and you don't get any of these cupcake games, because everyone plays cupcakes. I don't see spare me the outrage that SMU, Indiana didn't. Neither did Texas. Texas play nobody. And the 2 times they played a ranked team, they lost. Looking at the Georgia games, can we stop with this whole we didn't play nobody BS, right? And so, I think at the end of the day, this system, it doesn't need modification. Sure, absolutely. No one's going to sit here and say that it doesn't. But Indiana, from a resume standpoint, did everything they needed to do to make the playoffs. And at the end of the day, you just got to play the games you've been given. Play the games you've been given. You can sit here and complain all day long about, well, if Bama was in these games, or, if SMU played Bama's schedule, they would go 6-6, right? My critique to that is, like, first off, are you certain about that? Are you certain about that? And then second, like, you're doing these what-if scenarios as if, like, that's how we're, like, I'm not judging SMU based on if they were playing Alabama's schedule. I'm basing SMU's resume based on their resume of what they played, and I'm looking at Alabama's resume at what Alabama played, and SMU doesn't have a massive loss to Oklahoma and a massive loss to Vanderbilt. I just don't understand the argument here, man. Like, I don't understand why you would sit here and be like, oh my God, the committee failed college. No, guys, sometimes blowouts happen. Blowouts happen in sports. You got to go actually play the game. You could do all the analytics and nerdy shit about putting shit in the computer and looking at, like, well, this guy has. No, you still got to play the game on Saturday. And what happened was Notre Dame was more prepared than Indiana. Texas was more prepared than Clemson. Penn State was more prepared than SMU. Tennessee was less prepared than Ohio State. The home field matters. There's certain things with this system that matter. And are there flaws? Absolutely. But guess what? It's because every system would have flaws. The BCS had flaws. BCS had flaws. 14 playoff had flaws. The 12-team, hell, I proposed for a 32-team playoff. That would still have flaws, and how you determine that. But it would be a little bit more equal in consideration to the sport of college football. I don't quite 32 teams, all 10 conference winners, the next best 22 based, and I would base it on AP ranking. I think you literally could take the committee out of this, leave it to the AP rankings. Those tend to be accurate. Your 10 conference winners get in, and then the next best 22 based on AP ranking. There, I fixed the issue for you. And what's the AP looking for? The eye test, wins and losses, right? I think we need a standard of what gets you in, because the question's going to be like, should a 9-3, should a 3-loss Alabama team, one of those losses being to Vanderbilt, the other to Oklahoma, were not that they just lose to Oklahoma, they got absolutely demolished. That game completely destroyed any resume to me of Alabama. You had no hope after that. That eliminated you from the playoff. This idea of them even making it after the way they played against Oklahoma was absolutely asinine to me. Right? The eye test matters more than how many points per game you score. Because you could run up the score against Mercer, and that changes the analytics. Right? Indiana played a really tough schedule this year, for the most part. They were predicted to finish 17th in the Big Ten, and they finished in the top 5, and they made the playoffs. So I don't quite get the argument here. Is there flaws? Sure. We can work those kinks out next year and the year after that, and eventually we'll get a system that works. I think that this is going to lead to expansion. I think 16, if we're not going to do 32, which is what I would want, at least 16, so we could. I think we need to take the first round buys out of this. Just personally, I think we can do 16 teams, and what I would do is I think the seeding needs to be fixed. Absolutely, I don't think the 4 should have to play the 5-12 winner. I don't think. I mean, first off, that's an easy way to, the 8-9 team shouldn't have to play the 1. Honestly, right? Like, that doesn't fit in any other bracket that's ever been done. The 1 seed typically plays the winner of, though if you think about it, in the NCAA bracket, you have your 16 team little bracket there, right? And if the 1 seed wins, who do they play? They play the 8-9 winner. So I don't really have an issue with that. I think that's a small issue to me. I do think seeding I think 16 would work better than 12, solely because I'm not the biggest fan of like first round buys, right? I think everyone who makes the playoff should play right? 16 teams, 1 plays 16, 2 plays 15, and you work your way up, right? And to me, that people are right. There's only like 6 really good teams in college football, but the issue isn't who's really good. The issue is like it's any given Saturday you get on that field, you could lose. And that's what's exciting about college football. And you need games that matter in this time of the year because a lot of these bowl games just don't matter. Fans don't care about them. Players don't care about them. Coaches don't really care about them. So why should I care about them, right? You need games that matter at this time of the year for college football. And I think that's what this creates. It creates an excitement. Have you ever been excited on a third Saturday in December, on the Saturday before Christmas? Have you ever been excited in college football ever before to watch college football? No, because it's some random ass bowl game that has like the only day of bowl games that people really look forward to are January 1st, right? Because those are the big 6 bowl games, where those are now in the college football playoffs. I don't see why we need to suffer through the Myrtle Beach Bowl when no one watches it, or the Gasparillo Bowl, or the Hawaii Bowl. No one watches these games. So get rid of them. Expand the playoffs to 32 teams. If you make the playoffs by making that bracket, and that's going to require you probably 9 wins to even be in consideration to being one of the next best 22 teams. Because at the end of the day, wins should matter, and that's my position. Wins have to matter for me to care. Like if you're a 7-win team, I don't. You're average. You're not good. You're average. If you're an 8-win team, okay, now you're pressing into good, right? And so you shouldn't be playing postseason football at a 7-5 or a 6-6 record. 8-4 is getting up there. That's 66% of your win. 9 wins is 75% of your season. That's leading towards a postseason to me, right? But wins should matter. Wins need to matter. That eye test should matter when it comes to seeding, right? And so I think at the end of the day, just like I said in episode 1, the answer to everyone's problem, and everyone's like, oh no, man, you guys ruined college football by talking about a playoff and expansion and this, that, and no, guys. The problem is everyone wants no playoff or as little of playoff as possible. The answer is real simple. You have 2 other playoff systems already in college sports that you could have looked into. You had March Madness, or you had the FCS football playoff, the 2014 playoff. Like, these already are in existence that we could see that they work. The answer isn't a 12-team playoff. The answer really isn't even a 16-team. The answer is a 32-team playoff. That fixes the problem. Because it's like basketball, right? It's like basketball. And are there critiques about who gets in the college basketball system? Sure. There's going to be some fan base, out in the middle of nowhere but there's really, like in college basketball, there's 25 good teams, right? But in the situation when you have to play the game and you have to travel and you're playing neutral site games, you have to play the game. And so you'll get a team like Loyola Chicago, who everyone's cheering for, right? Like, Clemson's out. My other team after that was going to be Tennessee. They're out. Guys, I'm cheering for Boise now. Like, I think Oregon's going to win the whole tournament. But I'm cheering for an underdog like Boise, and I'm cheering for Arizona State. These are teams that people don't even think should be in the bracket, right? These are the small brands that people don't care about, that get an opportunity. If this was a 4-team playoff, you would have Texas, probably not Texas, you would have Georgia, you would have Penn State, you would have Notre Dame, and you would have probably Texas because they're the 5, right? But and they would overlook the Mountain West, and they would overlook Arizona State in the Big 12. They would put Notre Dame in for being 11-1. They would be the 3 seed. Oregon would be the 1. Georgia would be the 2. I'm even questioning if Notre Dame would be in there. I would say they are. Penn State would be the 5 and be the first team on the looking out, right? If this was a 4-team playoff, it would be Oregon as the 1, Georgia as the 2, Notre Dame as the 3, and probably Texas as the 4. Right? That would probably how this would go. Right? And so the opportunity for a Boise State to play for a national championship is why I'm excited for this system. The opportunity for the Big 12 to get represented. You know, they're part of the Power 5 conference, but they never are in these talks for the playoffs, right? You have to go undefeated to make the playoffs in the Big 12. And I don't think that that's fair. Right? In the 4-team system, if you're not SEC or Big 10, right, and that's why these are the 2 conferences complaining. That's why they're the 2 conferences complaining, because the 4-team playoff in the BCS system benefits the Big 12, or excuse me, the Big 10 and the SEC. The Big 12, the ACC, the Pac-12, the group of 5 colleges get 0 representation in those systems, and it's right. And if that's the case, because there's not a system in football that's going to please these guys. At this point, I would be much more happier if the Big 10, if the Big 10 and the SEC came together, created their own league, and got the hell out. Because their fan bases are the only ones complaining. If y'all think y'all are the greatest and you're better than everybody else, just leave the NCAA. Create your own league. That'll be the only way to please these people, right? Because the issue is everyone's so bogged down by brands, right? And is an expanded playoff about money for ESPN or ABC to get more, money for these games? Absolutely, sure, that's fine. College football sells, and they get ad money for playing more games. That's the way of it, right? But it's not like they weren't getting ad money for these bowl games. They'd get more for the playoffs, and that's my whole point. It's more beneficial to get rid of these bowl games and just expand the playoffs. But at the end of the day, these people complain about that, but when the big brands like Alabama don't make it, this playoff thing is ruined. None of these fans would be complaining about a 12-team system if you took out Clemson, Boise, and Indiana and replaced them with Alabama and Ole Miss or some other big brand that didn't make the playoffs. You can't convince me any other way. Because that's the truth. That's the truth right there. The Alabama's fans are complaining because they've been given everything. There was that one year they didn't make the conference championship game, and still made it as a 4 seed. The Alabama fans are so used to just getting what they want because of their bias. And you saw that at work on Selection Sunday, where there was so much bias being